podcast includes commentary and conversations about issues relevant to clinical psychology. It is intended to educate, entertain, and enlighten, and is not a substitute for actual mental health treatment. Individuals who share personally here choose willingly to tell their stories to benefit you, the listener. All other references to clinical situations are altered or limited to protect confidentiality. For more specific questions or help with a personal situation, please consult a local mental health professional. Therapy, mental health, real life. This is Psych Rally with Los Angeles-based clinical psychologist Dr. Martin Hsia.
Imagine the following. You are standing on the shores of consciousness. There is a bridge that extends from morning to the end of cosmic night, and from consciousness to the bottomless depths of unconsciousness. You begin the trek on this bridge, this royal road. You notice Freud and Jung, as well as others. There are few road signs. Those that can be detected are misleading. You inevitably reach a mysterious gap, as if the bridge suddenly ended and you were left, only to imagine. Those are the words of clinical psychologist practicing in Glendale, California, and my friend and colleague, Dr. Larry Brooks, who will be here talking with us today about dreams, and specifically a way of dealing with dreams in therapy called dream tending. Larry, thank you for speaking with me today.
You're welcome.
I've never said this to you before, but if I was going to construct the prototypical male therapist, I would choose a guy with nicely framed glasses, and I would give him nicely grayed hair and a little New York accent, and I would call him something like Larry Brooks. So,
well, that's a compliment that I will try to wear.
In addition to whatever you happen to be wearing now. Dreams are something that people are fascinated by, and have been fascinated by for millennia across culture, and yet have meant many different things. But to my understanding, in some cultures and throughout time, they've been considered to be prophetic of future events. In other cultures, diagnostic of medical illness. Freud's view, in short, was sort of that dreams can be symbolizing of unconscious conflict or expressive of repressed urges that are unacceptable to acknowledge or talk about at face value. And still others have said that dreams are just meaningless gobbledygook. In your opinion, at this time, is there any sort of coherent consensus about what dreams are and what they might mean?
No. Dreams are by their nature enigmatic and problematic. And if you ask any number of different clinicians about dreams, you'll probably find many different impressions, understandings of what dreams signify. You know, my experience is just interestingly in just doing therapy, and most of my clients, I think, will at some point know, because I mention it, that I'm interested in dreams, and so they will present dreams to me probably more often, more often than the average clinician. And often the person who's presenting a dream, unless they've been sort of socialized into sort of like dream understanding, will have a kind of skeptical impression of the dream, as if I had this dream and I don't know, and I don't think it means very much, but let me just share it with you. In terms of colleagues, I find that colleagues vary across a spectrum, and there are some people who are just not interested in dreams. Interestingly enough, I know a couple of psychoanalytic colleagues who are also, they just don't consider dreams to be part of their focus. And my sense, honestly, is that because dreams are complex and because dreams don't dreams are mostly uncanny, that are frightening and scary. And I think there's a quote in one of my papers, I quote Robert Bosnak, who says that the approach to dreams really generates something that he calls dream workers' panic. And dream workers' panic is the experience of being in the face of the uncontrollable unconscious.
I would have to think 60, 80, 100 years ago to think of psychoanalysts or a psychoanalyst not wanting to touch the subject of dreams would have been a lot harder to imagine.
I think what's happened is that in the generation or the second generation post-Freud, there's been just a turning away from dreams. And so once upon a time, actually, psychoanalysis was born of the dream, and that Freud's interpretation of dreams was based on his own self-analysis of his dreams. And one of the earliest formulations of his theory came from his dreams and was in the interpretation of dreams that he wrote back in 1900. And I would say that probably within the last 40 years, with the shift from what was more traditional classical psychoanalysis to what is become more of a varied, eclectic, contemporary, relational, multi-varied kind of psychoanalysis, there's been a loss of interest in dreams. And some of it is pragmatic. I was thinking about working with dreams in practice, and people come with problems. They come with full lives, and if you're seeing a person once a week, there's not that much time really to devote to dreams. And if you're given a dream, unless if you're going to do anything more than a cursory kind of, looking at the dream, it will take a session. And a lot of times there isn't enough time. And
that's not the priority for some people.
And in terms of psychoanalysis, what you've seen over the years is there's been an increasingly decline in frequency of sessions, so that the analysts are not seeing people 5-6 times a week, but they're seeing them much less frequently. And so, there's a practical as well as there are theoretical, reasons why dreams have become less of a focus.
Do you feel like if we agree that maybe there has been less interest in general in dreams at a societal level, how much of that is reflected in the shifts within specifically psychoanalysis and psychoanalysis's increasing de-emphasis on dreams?
Well, I think that to some extent, both psychoanalysis and culture at large are subjected to common conditions, one of which is the condition of technology, and that I think we're all being unconsciously sort of impacted by the ever-presence, ever-dependence on gadgetry that is probably leading to disconnection not only from others, but also disconnection from inner self. The fact that psychoanalysis has, fragmented into different, sort of sub-theories like attachment theory, self-psychology, that these theories have not developed, to my knowledge, and I'm not an expert, but they've developed theories within their theory, but they've not really developed a theory that addresses dreams from their point of view. And I think, to my knowledge, attachment theory is probably not interested in dreams. It's not part of their paradigm.
Well, and interesting is a natural outgrowth of moving from emphasizing on the individual unconscious to attachment theory, which is relational and interpersonal, where that's your focus. That is the realm within which the locus of your theory is centered on what happens between two people, rather than what's really deeply centered within one person. So I suppose that makes sense. Yeah.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. What would you say is there a loss to, as individuals and or as a society at large, with a growing indifference or lack of interest in dreams as a whole?
Yes, and maybe. That is...
Wow. At the same time.
Yes, there is a loss, and the loss may not be noticeable.
Okay.
Okay, and so personally, well, let me backtrack. Just in terms of the phenomena of dreaming, the phenomena of living. So, and there's memory, and so we remember or very little about what we experience. We don't remember everything that has ever happened to us. Maybe there are some people, and I think that's probably a neurological disorder. Dreaming is sort of similar. That is, we dream about with 25. Well, the average adult will dream maybe 25% of the time that he or she is sleeping, and of the dreams, there's probably on average 5 to 10% of dreams that are remembered. So most dreams are forgotten. Most dreams that are remembered are forgotten eventually or neglected. So that's the reality of dreaming and remembering. And this is our culture. We are a dreamless culture. And so one might suspect that there are major consequences to not knowing or not remembering or not focusing on dreams, but we just don't know that. The alternative, though, is several years ago, I took a 6-month intensive dream workshop with Stephen Eisenstadt up at Pacifica Graduate Institute, and Stephen was the founder of the program and also the first president, recently retired, and developed a way of working with dreams called dream tending. Yeah. And in the workshop, we would meet one weekend a month, and for 6 months, and spend essentially the time working on dreams. And during that period of time, I've looked back on the writings that I did, and during that period of time was a remarkable outgrowth of work. I was writing a tremendous amount of poetry. I was involved with my dream life, and for me the main benefit of dreams was I was much more deeply connected to my creative self, and I was much more in tune with my shadows. And so I think I was living more authentically and more engaged and less fearfully, and that is something that I felt was, sort of a product of actively over time having a relationship with the dreams. And the value of that is that we dream, we dream many things, but within the dreams there are often the things we fear, the things that we find difficult.
Sure.
And so if we're facing difficulty and trying to work with our personal difficulty, and dreams are one way, not the only way, but then I think you're much more grounded.
Well, I guess we could think of it in terms of if to go back to Freud, ironically, if we agree that dreams are some special pathway or the royal road, as he said, to the unconscious, that which is deep within us but not always easily accessible, when you were in a consistent state of tapping that and exploring that, there was some just level of aligning between your conscious life and what, as you said, all the fears, urges, creativity, things deeply was inside you. Yeah. Let's distinguish, because you're talking about dream tending and the workshop that you did, and I'm familiar with some of the works that you've done since then. But traditionally, right, just to really draw that distinction, see if I'm accurately characterizing this, Larry, that dreams to Freud, that there was the content of the dream at face value, what he called the manifest content. I'm, flying through a room or something, but then there was the latent content in which, what was symbolically being expressed, what urge or conflict was actually symbolically being shown in the manifest content.
Right.
And the job of the analyst in the traditional interpretive style is to interpret or translate the latent meaning and to somehow bring that into a less threatening form, perhaps for the analysand or patient to understand or do something with. But that puts a lot of authority and power in the psychoanalyst's seat. Maybe you can use that as a jumping off point to describe how the theory for dream tending and how that's different.
Yes. Right. So, Freud felt that the unconscious was very much a knowable, decipherable, area of psyche, and so yes, how you described, his thinking about the dream work and the moving from the manifest to the latent, using free association and the authority of the analyst was, very much part of the classical Freudian approach to not just dream work but also psychoanalysis.
No.
And dream tending, in contrast, is a non-interpretive approach and has a different understanding of the unconscious, a very different understanding of the dream itself, and also a different understanding of the relationship between the dream tender and the dreamer.
Mm-hmm.
And even the idea, the term dream tending, as opposed to interpreting, it carries a certain significant statement that the dream tender is there to tend to and to guide and elicit, to bring out, as opposed to impose. And I think a lot of traditional psychoanalytic theory was felt as imposition of knowledge upon, say, the analysand. So
it sort of loosens the hierarchical connotation of the relationship.
Well, and it also introduces the idea that when this, let me just backtrack, the dream tending developed by Stephen Eisenstadt was heavily influenced by James Hillman and grows out of a Jungian archetypal psychological perspective, so really parallel to psychoanalysis. And in dream tending, the idea of the psyche is more complex than how Freud described it, and so we have the personal, which is how Freud thought of the unconscious, which is personal. Then we have the collective, which is Jung's sense of what the unconscious was. And then we have I think his term is, and I may be mistaken, the global, or actually it's the world unconscious. So the idea is that the world is dreaming and everything in the world, animate and inanimate, is alive. And so the sense of the dream itself is, in Freud's sense, I dreamed. In the dream tending sense is that we're not dreaming alone. That is, the dream itself is somehow a visitation. It's an amalgam of self and other being an indeterminate other, that is the world influence on self. And so the idea of the dream as a representation of self and also the collective, now expands the dream. Connected to this is the notion of what dream images are, how they were regarded in a dream. And basically, Freud would think of a dream image, and it could be, say, if it was an animal, a lion, it would be a lion that was symbolic of something. It could be symbolic of power, symbolic of father, aggression. In dream tending, the image is not assigned any particular symbolic meaning, and there is a feeling that the image itself has a life, has a value, also has a meaning that needs to be revealed. That is, it is a combination of the image or the meaning of the individual, as well as combining something about the image itself that's separate from the individual. So the image is an alloy.
Well, and I think you hear these books and resources, and maybe this is arising more from traditional ideas that, if you have a dream about, say, the lion, or, showing up to work or school without wearing pants, that it automatically has a assumed theme that is universal. And that's not to say that there may be some commonalities when different people dream along a similar theme, but this is sort of the interplay between that which is collective, as you said, but that which is individual. It sounds like with dream tending, there's not necessarily a priori assumption that if you dreamed about a lion or missing an article of clothing, that automatically means something. Yeah? We're in that sense starting with a little bit more of a blank slate.
Yeah, I think the dream is wanting to be understood on its own terms. So I think Hillman has said that traditional dream analysis is the ego interpreting the dream within the framework of the ego consciousness. That is, bringing the dream to the ego's understanding. And Hillman would say that dream work needs to have the dream interpret the ego, which requires the ego to sort of bow out of the equation so that the dream itself can reveal itself to the individual. That the ego itself is a mediator that actually creates the understanding that it creates through interpretation really misses the value of the dream.
Of course, and what follows from that is running with the dream tending theory, then none of us are able to interpret the ego through the lens of the unconscious or the dream content, if you will, if we're not in touch with our dreams.
Yes.
Let alone have the sort of facilitation or mindset or the right context for tending to it, or whatever term we use.
Yes.
There's an interesting irony with what we were saying earlier, that as a society there's been less of an emphasis on dreams, and as people in the mental health field and in psychoanalysis there has been a shift away from dreams, and yet, as you said, within psychoanalysis there's been more of a field to that which is interpersonal and relational. Here it seems like we're kind of doing both things with dream tending, right? We're sort of seeing dreams through a new lens, but also in a way that is more fundamentally assumed to be relational and social and connected, and not just individual. Would that be fair to say?
Well, I think so. I know when I've been doing dream tending up at Pacifica, it's been within the context of groups. So the training has been within the context of groups of people as large as 50, but what happens there is it becomes a community of dreamers, so that the way dreams are shared, very different from the way dreams were shared psychoanalytically. That is, historically, analyst and analysand, in the privacy of their consultation room, would talk about the dream. In the dream tending groups that I've participated in, the dream is shared within the community, so that the way Stephen teaches is he would lecture, but he would also have individuals come up on stage and share a dream, and he would work with them dream tending, but he would also include the audience in working with the dreams as well, so that there was very much a larger social community. And my sense is that in a way, the way that he's working is probably echoing sort of way indigenous, cultures worked with dreams, because they would work with dreams not privately. They'd work with dreams,
as a community.
As a community, yeah.
You've been trying so hard and very graciously to get me involved into a dreaming group that I know you facilitate, to do it socially, which I just haven't been able to make. But what I picture from what you've described to me is almost, if someone, bravely and vulnerably shares a dream that they've had in a group context or in a training like that you've attended, what sort of ensues from there is other people who are privy to the dream will kind of free associate from there, in a sense. And I think the way I read it written in one place is that one individual's dream becomes the group's dream, if you will, even if we're, if you will, interacting with it in a waking state. Am I getting that right?
Well, yes, and that that is there's dream tending, which we're talking about, which is working with individual dreams that regard the individual dream as having a connection to the larger collective. And then there's something another way of working with dreams that called social dreaming, and this just is a way of working with dreams in groups, specifically groups of individuals and groups of dreams. Very different from a lot of more traditional dream group work, which would work with an individual dream within a group. So in social dreaming, you'd have a group, however many number of people in a group share their different dreams. And this technique was developed by this guy, Gordon Lawrence, who's no longer alive, but he was an English analyst. And what he would say is basically that the idea of sharing the dream in the group was really a process of relinquishing the ego's ownership of the dream and donating it to the group. And through the process of how he would work with dreams, the dreams itself would kind of become chapters in a collective dream, so that by the end of a dream group, I mean, if it were, and it's very complicated to do, you would hope to have a sort of a thematic where it's not my dream, your dream, his dream, her dream. It's one dream that speaks to the group and reflects the dreaming of the group, and that's I think that may be what you were referring to, because that's a little different than dream tending.
Can you draw that link for me a little bit? Yeah, because both of which, dream tending and social dreaming, deviate from traditional Freudian dream interpretation and seem to have some overlap, but is sort of, in terms of the people that have been spurring these ideas and approaches along, what is the relationship there, and how do you see the overlap between dream tending and social dreaming?
Well, I'm not sure. Social dreaming is very much a product of Gordon Lawrence's work, and he's used it for a number of different purposes: conflict resolution, consultation with business industry, and there have been people here in the States who have adapted his work, and I've found that there are several people here in Los Angeles. There are people up in Berkeley, but very few people are, to my knowledge, at this point in time, aware of social dreaming. What I'm doing here with some colleagues is we're actually adapting social dreaming. We're calling it connected dreaming, and the way in which we're adapting it is that we're actually trying to incorporate some dream tending procedures within the social dreaming process to just to help, I think, develop more, to allow the dream images a little bit more life within the dream group process. And
I see.
So, I mean, they really are different, but they share a lot of similarities in terms of social dreaming, dream tending. Both recognize sort of this collective unconscious, both really shy away from interpretation.
Right.
And they also, I think, have an understanding that there is something intrinsically useful, meaningful, beneficial about unconscious thinking that conscious thinking requires for depth. And so that the social dreaming process, which is a group of people coming together, sharing their dreams, and then free associating to the dreams, so that the idea is that the dream processing itself will actually echo kind of a relaxed, waking, conscious, dreamlike state, and so that the dream will be met by as dreamlike a waking state as possible to elicit the communion between waking consciousness and dreaming unconsciousness.
There's an aspect of permeating the sleeping state and what happens there and what we are quote unquote aware of in a waking state.
Yes.
I like how, I think I read how James Hillman put it in one of the dream tending articles you and I've shared, that there's an aspect of being on speaking terms with one's unconscious.
Yeah.
And dreams is one aspect of doing that. But what I think both dream tending and social dreaming allow the possibility for is finding other ways more within one's own purview and within the context of hopefully safe individuals to get on speaking terms versus perhaps before, when there was only one way of doing it, there was only one possible interpretation, and it could be highly subjective and even incorrect,
right,
if you will.
Well, it made me think that is, in the connected dreaming groups that I've been involved with, there are several things, happen. That is, when people share their dreams and when dreams are sort of become part of a community, there's clearly not one interpretation. There isn't an interpretation, but there's really an enlargement of the meaning of the dream, so that if there are 3 people, if there are 5 people, if there are 8 people associating to one person's dream, the dream image now becomes much more expansive. The other thing in connected dreaming that I think is valuable is that the dream group process is a process that is mediated by the dream and the dream images, the dream figures. It's not an interpersonal, relational group process that we're going to talk about personalities. And so it's actually asking the ego to take a seat and to watch and to allow the dream figures to speak. And so when we do connected dreaming, we actually have dream figures interacting with dream figures that the individual participants have selected from their dreams, rather than having personalities interact with personalities. And so I think what happens there is that people are actually able to relate to each other, not at the level of me versus you, but of a level of what are kind of complexes, at the level of qualities, at the level of things that are being personified in their dreams, that does make for a connection, and sometimes a fairly profound connection between people.
I would have to think so. If it's my unconscious connected to your unconscious, what could be more core and connecting?
Yes, let's watch out.
Yeah, we could go places with that. Yowzers. Larry, have you seen Inception?
I saw it a while ago, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's what comes to mind, the idea of how one person's dream can be entered into by other people, in a sense, and then all those people can be dreaming within the context of that person's dream, however constructed. And I don't know if there was any inspiration from some of what we're talking about here, but it'd be an interesting thing to free associate to with a bunch of dream tenders or social dreamers.
Yeah, I actually don't, have that much to say. I think I came to dreaming from a sort of fairly, I would say, conventional psychoanalytic frame of mind, which, as we've talked about earlier, really is imposing a kind of a logical structure on the not just the dream meaning, but even the dream phenomena, dreaming. And since I've been studying, dream tending, and exposing myself to other perspectives, particularly James Hillman, that speak to that dreaming is a transpersonal process.
Yeah.
And when we're asleep, we don't know what is happening, and so the idea is that when we're asleep, we are like uniquely open, vulnerable. We're portals to other kinds of experiences that now are represented as dreams, and in the dreams, all kinds of things, all kinds of visitations happen. So in my mind, expanding one's sense of what the dreaming experience is like does lead one into what might be, looked upon as more mystical ideas about people and how they're connected.
Sure.
And so, yes, I feel like my sense of reality is being expanded as I'm trying to, really understand, what the dreaming process is like.
Indeed. I was recently reading on a large university research website. These are dream researchers, obviously working in a sort of from a neuroscience perspective, very academic context. But basically the premise or the theory that they're operating from is they essentially said that dreams may have some meaning and cultural use, but that they don't actually serve any adaptive function. A lot of what we're talking about would seem to contradict that mentality.
I think the interesting thing, and I am by no means an expert on neuroscience or neuroscience research on dreaming, but as interest in dreaming has declined among psychoanalysts, interest in dreaming has increased among neuroscientists. And I can't summarize the literature. There is a neuroscientist who I think is also a psychoanalyst, and I think his name is Mark Solms, Solms, and there's a lot more congruence, not so much contradiction between what neuroscience is saying and sort of analytic ways of thinking about dreams. Historically, older neuroscience sort of tended to see dreams as being fairly inconsequential, and but now I think what the neuroscience that I'm familiar with that they're doing is they're really being able to identify locations of the brains that are being activated, in the dreaming state, so that they have a better understanding of what parts of the brain are being activated that actually is helping them to sort of, better explain what the phenomena of dreaming, why the phenomena of dreaming appears the way it does, as opposed to the waking consciousness. And so the other thought is that dreaming and sleeping are still puzzles for neuroscientists, but the idea is that on some level something is happening. And so one theory is that regardless of the meaning of dreams, the process of dreaming is a continually recycling of psychic material, and that psychic material goes from waking experience into dreaming, into remembering, into dreaming, and that this psychic, so that the issue is not how little we remember of our dreams, but that the dreams themselves are really the air in which we think. So it's always feeding us, even as we're not remembering things. And so there's a fairly complicated loop between experience, what happens when we're sleeping, how that sleeping process gets translated into dreams, and even when we're not remembering the dreams, how that process still lives within the psychic universe.
It brings up so many questions, because as you said, if only a certain percentage of our dreams are remembered, what happens to the rest? Where do they go? Are they still in a memory bank somewhere? And you described us initially as an increasingly dreamless culture, and some would even say we're an increasingly sleepless culture to begin with.
Yes.
Let alone having dreams. I think the one research finding that I'm more familiar with is that there's a positive correlation between REM dreaming and emotion regulation during the daytime,
Right.
which would suggest that there's some adaptive function. But what is the mechanism behind that? That's a harder thing to measure scientifically. But I suppose it does have to shift, at the very least, the language around dreaming when, as you said, at one time it was very much the territory of psychoanalysis, and now has sort of very much the territory of the research academic world.
Mm-hmm.
If people want to learn more about the current state of affairs of dreams and or specifically dream tending, social dreaming, some of the things that you and I have been talking about today, Larry, are there resources, websites that you can point people towards?
Yes, I mean, not to be exclusively self-serving, but you can go to my
Please be self-serving. That's okay.
You can go to my website, and on my website I have posted a number of essays on social dreaming, on dream tending, on dreams in general, and in the articles there are references to other dream resources. That is, if you went to Google dream tending, you would access a lot of material. Pacifica, social dreaming, Gordon Lawrence has a website that has archived a lot of the work that he's done, and so those would be two.
Okay, good place to start would be LarryBrooks.com.
DrLarryBrooks.com.
DrLarryBrooks.com, right, okay. Is there a specific book that you recommend frequently in your practice, or that particularly informs your practice, that would be interesting to highlight?
In terms of dreams, again, there's a number of things. There's Stephen Eisenstadt wrote this book called Dream Tending, which is really a very specific, not very theoretical, but sort of a hands-on guide to helping an individual develop a relationship, a dream tending relationship to their own dreams. A book that I've recently read that is written by a contemporary psychoanalysis gives a good overview of the status of dreaming within at least contemporary psychoanalysis. I think the book is written by Paul Lipman, Nocturnes, Listening to Dreams. Then James Hillman, who wrote this book, Dreams and the Underworld. And, what I find, I like books that are like dreams. I mean, that is, if a book is going to tell me something that I sort of know, or that's going to tell me something I don't know in a way that is not very interesting, at this point I have not much patience, but James Hillman is a incredibly wise and thoughtful guy that really is interesting to read.
Captivated your attention.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Any particular work of art, culture, film that has really just left an impact on you?
Work, culture, art, film, music. Honestly, I like music. I like poetry.
Right.
And
a poet yourself.
And I'm sort of, yes, I am a poet. I've been of late listening to a lot of Leonard Cohen, and particularly since he died, what I started doing was not just listening his music, but watching YouTube videos of his concerts. And he's just for me kind of a role model in terms of not only being having a real sensibility to the nuances of language and relationship, but incredibly respectful as a performer. So there's one. What I find is that I write poetry. I go to poetry I imagine a baby goes to a blankie, not a mother but a blankie. It's in the absence of. It's as a mediation of how to be with oneself in states of difficulty. Yeah. And so I would say that is probably the value that, for me, poetry and music more than...
Places of comfort in times of distress.
Places of comfort, of processing, of containment in times of distress, yeah.
Yeah. Is there any personal experience, Larry, that you'd be willing to share that taught you a particularly valuable life lesson that we can all learn from?
Yeah, let me just say it. Yes, actually, I got personal experiences are kind of happen with a great deal of frequency, so it's not like
they're happening right now too. By the
exactly.
way.
So it's not like there's one transformative experience in my life. Actually, they're my birth, perhaps, but that marked a difference. And so, I think there are multiple things that happen, and part of dreaming is awakening oneself up to the meaningful within the day-to-day. But I did have this experience which is sort of was significant to me in a dream tending workshop, where you have to understand there was about 50 people in this group conference room, and this is part of the a weekend workshop, and they were talking about the presence of the divine, and I see myself as a sort of a non-spiritual person, and I had difficulty with the concept of I understood the construct, but I really didn't have an experience of a living experience of the divine. Mm-hmm. And so I raised my hand and explained what I just said to Stephen, and so he told me that during a break he recommended that I go to find a private place that had a mirror and look into the mirror. Okay. So what I did was I found a place, and I just wanted to read to you the experience. I walked into the bedroom, conscious of the mirror on the wall. I looked quickly and then turned away. I removed my glasses, approached, and stared. I noticed my big ears of childhood, the short gray hair of the present, and my face. Eyes watery yet stern or implacid. I continued to stare and felt a shift of being, a reversal of perspective as I intently looked at by my own silent, unrevealing stare. The moment was brief, and I returned to looking at the image. I made a few faces. I tried to smile. It was physically impossible for me to smile. Every smile turned into a sneer. I decided I would visit myself again. So that was really like a first date experience, totally awkward and disappointing. And so I obviously did not discover the divine, but you
had an encounter with yourself.
I had an encounter with myself, mm-hmm. and that led to this. And so I wrote a poem, and I called it Accepting What I Have to Offer. The eye of me meets at the mirror, 6 decades of walking blindly, turning possibility into utility, became a remote thing. The eyes of me looking, vacant to self as stranger, eyes watery still, virginal and curious, as I lay myself open, not even a smile, and a stern, almost sullen, empty of the divine, a name held high, a self lay low and unseen. Who in my eyes will speak? Where in my gaze is the divine? 7 minutes was enough for today. The end.
Thank you. I resist the temptation to interpret that.
You may interpret that, but I'd recommend that interpretation come after at least a margarita.
Oh, okay, all right. That sounds like a good idea.
Well, thank you, thank you very much.
Well, and thank you, Larry, for the work that you're doing on dreams, and all the facilitating and sharing that you've been doing for myself and other colleagues in our arena, and for speaking with me today on the program.
Well, it was a pleasure.
All right, that's Dr. Larry Brooks. I just spoke with a friend recently who shared with me a really powerful dream that she had. She was, this is a number of years ago, she was going through a really terrible time in her marriage, It wasn't clear if things were going to work out, and she and her husband, at the time, they had a young son and had originally wanted to have another child, but the thinking at the time was, that unless this marriage gets turned around somehow, not interested in having another child together. And she told me about a dream she had in that period in which, it was just a really rough time. And in her dream, she was seeing kind of at eye level water. I can't remember if she said it was like a pool or a lake. And she was seeing water at eye level with a pink life raft floating by. And behind the raft were the letters AVA, or Ava. And my friend recalls waking up and recalling the dream, and she just knew that it was a symbol of hope. And she said that, the life raft was symbolizing hope for her situation, and that her marriage could and would be saved. And she knew that there would be a daughter in their future. And Ava, a derivative of the name Eve, means new life, all of which came with a really great sense of peace for my friend. And sure enough, over time, over a couple of years, and with a lot of hard work, they were able to really repatch and heal their marriage, which is amazing. And to the point where they decided, we can do this. Let's have a second child. It turned out, in fact, to be a daughter, which they named Ava. And, clearly this was all with this dream in mind. And the image from that dream was really sort of a beacon of hope for of what was to come, and something to hang on to for my friend in a really, really dark, rocky period for her and her husband. And my friend who shared this dream told me about this. She's not, this is not the kind of person who, is out there looking for strange, mystical reasons to attribute things to. Not someone who's into, new age lifestyle or beliefs. This is someone very grounded, educated, skeptical, not a likely candidate in some ways to have a dream like this with this kind of meaning. And she was like, she's telling me this, and she says, I know this sounds crazy, but when I heard her share this experience, it was very moving. I mean, it's amazing. It's hard to explain, and yet this was her experience. So, for anyone who's a bit skeptical of what dreams really are, what to make of them, how much meaning to ascribe to them, I have to admit, it's hard to know for sure. And yet from stories like my friends, it's at the same time, it's really hard to completely write off that they can really speak to us and communicate something important to us, something meaningful, even if that mechanism remains pretty, elusive and unattainable. And I think in that sense, dreams, while they can be so powerful, they also kind of keep us humble, because it's really hard to nail down really kind of how they work and what they're about. So, I welcome dialogue with any of you, my friends, listeners, about dreams that you've had, perhaps any that had an uncanny timing, or that really seemed to have a special meaning for you, or that just stuck out to you for one reason or another. And I'm curious what appeal something like social dreaming, as my friend Dr. Larry Brooks described, what appeal might that have for you? Does that feel safe, the idea of kind of just being vulnerable and sharing a dream openly with a group of people like that? Does it sound intriguing, or would you want to know that it's more grounded in science and research? In the world of cognitive behavior therapy, at least, dreams are rarely, if ever, come to think of it, now that I think of it, is rarely are they mentioned in scholarly settings and literature, to my knowledge. I think dreams, other than maybe when it comes up related to nightmares for trauma survivors, I think it's not something that comes up a lot, at least in my clinical setting. But at the same time, when it comes up with people I'm working with, people want to bring it up in therapy, their dreams to kind of reflect on together, see how best to make sense of them together. I'm all ears. Larry, I think I'll just wrap this up by saying, Larry really made the case for what our mind is doing when we're asleep sure does seem to be an untapped and forgotten treasure trove of information and connection to ourselves and in turn potentially to one another in a way that is significant and powerful, and yet certainly quite mysterious. So welcome any thoughts and reactions to what Dr. Brooks shared on this episode of Psych Rally. Switching gears a little bit, I want to share quickly an email response I received after our last episode, and I was given permission by the listener to share here. This was episode 26, in which my friend Nolani Jai talked about her experiences with trichotillomania, or hair pulling disorder. The listener writes, I would like to take the time to thank you for bringing up this topic. As a mother who had never heard of this topic before, I struggled for about a year trying to find out, quote, what was wrong with my 8-year-old daughter. Luckily, I stumbled across Mrs. Nolani Jai and the BFRB website in March, and it's helped me to start put things in perspective. Unfortunately, I think that I am more knowledgeable than the mental health staff that worked with my daughter. Just last week, her counselor asked her, quote, do you want to be bald and ugly? Oof. I could have died, says the mother and listener. The look on my daughter's face just made me want to cry. But that's not the end of it. She has a psychiatrist who prescribes medicine, but her counselor and the psychiatrist work in the same company and yet don't talk. And they put her on Prozac, and they changed to Zoloft, and then added Buspirone since the end of December, and subsequently she had an episode while on the Zoloft. The quote, doctor just added more meds. And my daughter melted down completely 3 days later. And my pharmacist at the local CVS told me to, and this is in all caps, change her doctor because he's dangerous. And it's really sad to say that she might be better not even seeing a doctor, but she not only has tricks, she has other issues. So I'm constantly trying to balance what she needs, but no one I look to for help knows what to do themselves. She goes on to mention that she connected with Nolani and the Heart Group and says, Heart is our only real resource. When I think of Mrs. Jai, I just want to cry. Family can be just as ignorant as our medical, quote, help. So thank you for bringing up this topic and sharing her story, because it's all of our stories. We just don't want our kids to ever be in that closet. Thank you to this listener and mother for taking the time to respond in this way. It's upsetting to hear what you and your daughter have been through to get to the right place, the right attention and support. But it sounds like I'm delighted that you were able to connect with Nolani, who obviously is a great resource and gets it from personal standpoint. And at the same time, obviously, as a psychologist myself, it's disturbing. You know, when you hear what horrific care and attention some people can receive from mental health providers. So, when our field and profession fails, it's hard to hear. I'm glad that this daughter and her mother have connected with Nolani. Hope they soak in every ounce of support and love from the Heart Group. And I hope this podcast reaches people who need to hear it. So I'm delighted that it was meaningful to this listener. Please, you're welcome to share it with friends of yours, anyone else who's listening. And appreciate you listening in today to our episode with Dr. Larry Brooks talking about dreams, dream tending, and social dreaming. Next episode will be with Sam Louie, who is a therapist himself, but who'll be talking more of a personal nature about his own experience with sex and sex addiction. Until then, thanks for listening in, and sweet dreams.